This is the early morning of the 15th of March, 2026. Got this clip sent to me by one of my subscribers, put up by Conway Commentary. Title: No NATO, no Congress. Trump's Iran war is Jared Kushner's real estate deal with missiles. When dumpy Donald Trump launched military strikes on Iran under Operation Epic Fury, the media called it a foreign policy crisis. But as George Conway explains, the truth is far darker. This isn't a military operation designed by Pentagon professionals. It's a hostile corporate takeover orchestrated by Jared Kushner's secretive Board of Peace. With no NATO consultation, no warning to British allies, and a complete bypass of the U.S. Congress, American foreign policy has been privatized. Trump isn't just dropping bombs, he is negotiating reconstruction contracts, oil rights, and real estate deals with missiles. How did the world's most powerful military become a family business? And what happens when the U.S. Constitution is treated as an obstacle to a profitable war? Watch as George Conway breaks down the chilling reality of Trump's Iran war and why the collapse of institutional guardrails is a recipe for the end of the American empire. This clip plays for 11 minutes and 41 seconds.
Trump launched military strikes on Iran. No NATO consultation, no congressional approval, no allies informed, but Jared Kushner's private Board of Peace signed off immediately. Here's how American foreign policy just became a family business and why that should terrify anyone who remembers how empires fall. When you woke up this morning, you probably saw the headlines. Trump bombs Iran. Operation Epic Fury, another Middle East crisis. And if you are like most people, you assume this was a military decision made by generals, approved by Congress, coordinated with allies like Britain. That is how it is supposed to work. But let me tell you what actually happened, because the story you are being told is not the story that matters. This was not a military operation. This was a hostile corporate takeover. The target is not just Iran's nuclear facilities. The target is Iran's natural resources, strategic position, and reconstruction contracts worth hundreds of billions. And the people making these decisions are not Pentagon professionals. They are a small group led by Jared Kushner, operating through something they call the Board of Peace, making war decisions the same way a property developer decides which building to buy next. For 75 years, Britain and America built a system, NATO.
Look. That popped up. I'll get rid of this.
Constitutional checks, parliamentary approval for war, congressional oversight. These were safeguards designed to prevent exactly what is happening now. One man surrounded by family and business partners launching wars without asking anyone. Trump did not consult NATO. He did not inform Britain, even though British forces are stationed throughout the region. He did not seek congressional authorization, even though the Constitution requires it. Instead, he gathered a small group in the White House, most of them family members or business associates, and they made the decision the way you might decide to buy property. Does the deal make sense? What is the return? And once they agreed, the bombers launched. Now, have you noticed how this is being reported? The media keeps calling this a foreign policy crisis, but strip away the military language, and what you are really looking at is a business transaction being executed with missiles instead of contracts. Iran has oil. Iran has natural gas. Iran, if it can be controlled, represents one of the largest reconstruction opportunities in modern history. And the people making decisions about this war are the same people who stand to profit from what comes after. Let me ask you something directly. When a family business starts making war decisions without asking Parliament or Congress, without consulting allies, and without explaining to the public why their children might be sent to fight, what would you call that? I would call it a privatization of state power. the conversion of national defense into a family enterprise. And that is not a stronger America or safer Britain. That is the structure of a failing state. For those of you who lived through the Suez Crisis, you will remember what happens when leaders ignore allies and bypass constitutional process. What Trump is doing in Iran is worse, because at least in 1956, there was still a belief that rules mattered, that allies should be consulted, and that Parliament had a say. Churchill once said that jaw is better than war. He understood that diplomacy prevents catastrophic miscalculations. Trump has inverted that logic. He treats diplomacy as weakness and war as a business opportunity, and the result is what you are seeing this morning: bombs falling, oil prices spiking, and a family-run operation deciding without oversight how far this goes. Let me walk you through how this decision was made. In a functioning democracy, a decision to go to war follows a path. Intelligence is gathered. Allies are consulted. Legal authorization is secured. Parliament debates. Congress votes. None of that happened here. Instead, Trump held a meeting with a group that has no constitutional standing and no accountability to voters. This group, the Board of Peace, operates like a corporate board. They assess opportunities, they evaluate risk, they allocate resources, and they operate in secrecy. No minutes are published, no votes are recorded, and when the decision is made, it is presented not as a choice, but as an inevitability. Iran forced our hand. The threat was imminent. You have heard this language before. But here is what makes this different. In previous wars, there was at least a pretense that national interest was driving the decision. What we are seeing now is the collapse of that distinction. The people making war decisions are the same people negotiating reconstruction contracts and energy deals that will benefit them personally. Ask yourself this: if you were designing a system to maximize corruption and minimize accountability, could you do better than what exists right now? A president with business interests across the Middle East, a son-in-law running foreign policy like a real estate venture, no congressional oversight, no allied consultation, no requirement to disclose conflicts of interest. For British viewers, this should be particularly troubling. Britain has always believed that wars require public consent. That is why Parliament votes. That is why prime ministers have to stand in the Commons and explain themselves. Your ancestors learned that leaders who can make war without asking permission become tyrants. That lesson is the foundation of everything that separates a democracy from an autocracy. And yet Britain's closest ally has abandoned that principle entirely. Trump launched this operation without informing Downing Street. British forces in the Gulf found out by watching the news. That is not how allies treat each other. That is how empires treat colonies. And the next time Britain needs American support, the same logic will apply. What is in it for them? Can they make money from it? There is also a generational dimension worth considering. If you are over 60, you grew up in a world where institutions mattered. NATO was a commitment. The Atlantic Charter was a promise. Your children saw America make mistakes, but also honor treaties and operate within international law. Now ask yourself what world your grandchildren are inheriting. A world where the most powerful military on earth is run like a family business, where wars are started without asking Parliament or Congress, where allies are informed after the bombs have fallen, where the people making life and death decisions are the same people profiting from reconstruction contracts. That is not the world you fought to build. Let me bring this back to what happened this morning. Trump announced Operation Epic Fury in an 8-minute video on Truth Social.
Don't take it
Another ad pops up.
Not a press conference, not an address to Congress, not a statement with allies, a social media post. And the content was not a sober explanation of threats. It was a sales pitch. He talked about destroying Iran's military, but he also talked repeatedly about the opportunities that would follow. The reconstruction, the investment, the deals. That language is a signal. To the people who matter in this decision, the question was never whether military action was justified. The question was whether it was profitable. And once the Board of Peace determined the answer was yes, the operation moved forward. No debate, no vote, no consultation. For those who have followed Trump's career, this will sound familiar. It is exactly how he ran his businesses. Decide quickly, act decisively, ignore the rules. That approach might work in real estate, but it does not work in foreign policy because the consequences of bad decisions are not bankruptcy. They are dead soldiers, destabilized regions, and alliances that collapse. And that brings me to the question I want you to sit with. How many times in history have we seen leaders consolidate power by bypassing institutions and making war without accountability? And how many times has that ended well? Systems that allow one person to make those decisions without restraint do not produce stability. They produce chaos. What we are watching is not a strong America defending its interests. We are watching the privatization of American power, the conversion of the Pentagon into a subsidiary of a family business. And the people running that business are not asking what is good for America or Britain. They are asking what is good for them, what deals can be made, what contracts can be secured. That is not strength, that is corruption. And corruption at the level of foreign policy destabilizes everything. Allies stop trusting you. Adversaries stop fearing you. And the rules that kept the world relatively peaceful for 75 years start to dissolve. History offers a clear lesson here. When empires start treating wars as business opportunities, when leaders stop consulting allies, and when institutions designed to prevent overreach are bypassed, the decline is already underway. It happens through decisions like this one. Small violations that accumulate, norms that erode, and by the time people realize what has been lost, the system is already gone. So let me end with this. If you believe that democracies require rules, that wars require public consent, and that leaders should be accountable, then what is happening now is a fundamental threat. The question is not whether Iran deserves to be bombed. The question is whether you want to live in a world where a family business can make those decisions without asking anyone and without facing consequences when it goes wrong. Because that is the world your grandchildren will inherit unless this changes. A world where power is private, where wars are business deals, and where the institutions that once constrained leaders are treated as obstacles rather than protections. When you run a country like a family business, you do not get a stronger nation. You get a weaker one. You get a nation where allies do not trust you, where adversaries do not fear you, and where the people who should be making decisions are sidelined. That is not a recipe for security. That is a recipe for collapse. And if history teaches us anything, it is that collapse, once it starts, very hard to stop.
You know what's really amazing is that Jared Kushner has been running around Gaza, scoping out land for new buildings, I'm sure all along the coast. And Trump is using the fear of Iran becoming nuclear as justification to further their financial interests. This is beyond insane. Every minute that this dumpy Trump is allowed to remain in power brings us 1 minute closer to the end of this country and possibly the entire world. I'll attach the link. Special thanks goes out to my subscriber for having sent this to me. You need to send a copy of this to each one of your worthless representatives. Tell them to get off their fucking asses and do something. Trump's got to be removed. And he's got to be put in a cage where he fucking belongs. He's a convicted 34-count fucking felon. The judge really fucked up. That's just sort of what I think. I can't do this alone, folks. And nobody does for you what I do they?